What if your guide dog, your eyes to the world, suddenly pulled you into an unknown alley? That's exactly what happened to this blind veteran. But what he found there wasn't a threat. It was a life. This is the unbelievable story of a guide dog's instinct, a veteran's bravery, and the desperate cries that led to a miracle. For John, it began on a quiet path in Maple Grove Park. Ranger stopped, not at the usual curb, not for a low-hanging branch. The sleek German shepherd halted in the middle of the open path, his entire body tense. A low, unfamiliar whine vibrated through the leather handle in John's left hand. 27 steps from the bench to the first turn, the familiar crunch of gravel. This was John's world of sound, texture, and absolute trust. A trust about to be shattered. Easy, boy. What is it? Ranger didn't ease. Instead, he took a single, deliberate step forward, then another, off the path, onto the soft, unkempt grass. At Bonds Unspoken, we believe every heartwarming story, whether between humans or their animal companion, deserves to be told and heard. If you agree, please like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you can join us every time another bond speaks louder than words. John's breath hitched. This was wrong. Every instinct honed by years of discipline screamed it. But beneath that fear was a deeper, older truth. Ranger had never led him astray. Not in traffic, not in crowded halls, not in the echoing loneliness of his first days back home. The dog's focus was a palpable force, pulling him away from the known and into the silent, waiting shadows of the trees. An hour earlier, that trust had felt as unshakable as the ground beneath his feet. The late afternoon sun was a fading warmth on John's face as he locked the front door of his small, tidy house. His right hand found the smooth wood of the doorframe. 1, 2, 3 deliberate taps. A quick orienting touch before his left dropped, open and waiting to his side. A cold, wet nose nudged his palm, followed by the solid click of the harness handle being slotted into his grip. Ready for work, Ranger? John murmured, his fingers finding their familiar places along the rigid frame. The dog gave a soft, confident huff, his tail swishing once against John's leg. It was their language. Words were unnecessary. The connection was in the pressure of the handle, the subtle shifts in Ranger's gait, the synchrony of their movement. John was a former Army logistics specialist. His world had been one of precise patterns and clear orders. An IED attack in Kandahar had stolen his sight, but not his need for order. Ranger had given it back to him. Their route to Maple Grove Park was a mental map John could walk in his sleep. 87 steps to the end of his walkway. The smell of Mrs. Henderson's roses. The crack in the sidewalk he'd learned to half-step over. The rush of the intersection, where Ranger would stop, rock solid, until the traffic noise changed and he led them across with unwavering authority. Today was like any other. The park greeted them with its symphony of safety. The rhythmic thwump-thwump of a basketball from the distant courts. The shrieks and giggles from the playground, a chaotic melody. The rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, carrying the scent of damp earth and cut grass. Here, John didn't feel disabled. He felt competent. Free. Good boy, John said, his voice a low rumble of contentment. He loosened his grip slightly on the handle, a signal for Ranger to move to a looser, free walk guide. The dog adjusted instantly, matching John's leisurely pace but still maintaining a gentle forward pull, clearing the way. They walked in comfortable silence. John's mind wasn't on the path. It was adrift on the sounds. He imagined the kids on the swings, the old men playing chess at the concrete tables. He felt the late autumn sun, weak but persistent, on the back of his neck. This was peace. This was a life he'd fought for, rebuilt piece by fragile piece with a four-legged guide. He thought of the day Ranger was assigned to him, the nervous, gangly dog who seemed to look right through him. The months of training, of frustration, of spilled coffee and bruised shins, slowly melting into understanding. Then dependence. Then this, a bond thicker than blood. Ranger was more than his eyes. He was his early warning system, his confidant in the dark, the reason he could breathe without a constant knot of anxiety in his chest. John was pulled from his reverie by the slightest of changes. A hesitation in Ranger's step. Not a full stop, but a microsecond pause, as if the dog had processed a new piece of data. John's own steps faltered for a beat. "Everything okay, buddy?" Ranger made a soft sound in his throat, not a whine, but a thoughtful humph. He resumed walking, but his head was no longer pointed straight ahead. John could feel the subtle turn of the dog's shoulders through the harness, a slight angling to the left, toward the thicker grove of trees that bordered the park's eastern edge. A small thread of unease began to weave itself into John's calm. It was nothing, probably a squirrel. Ranger had a healthy interest in squirrels, but his training always won out. He might glance, but he never deviated. Yet the feeling persisted. The sounds of the park began to soften, muffled by the thickening foliage. The smell of grass shifted, mingling with a deeper, muskier scent of decaying leaves and damp bark. The temperature dropped a degree, the sun blocked by the canopy above. They reached their usual turnaround point, a specific oak tree whose gnarled roots John would sometimes sit on. Ranger usually nudged his knee here. A question. Go home? Today, Ranger walked past it. John's brow furrowed. "Hey, missed our spot, partner." He applied gentle backward pressure on the handle, a clear command to halt and reassess. Ranger stopped, but he didn't turn back. He stood perfectly still, his body thrumming with a tension John had never felt before. It wasn't the alert tension for a car or a step. It was deeper, more primal. The dog's head was cocked, ears pitched forward like satellite dishes. John listened. He heard the breeze, a distant shout, the far-off hum of a lawnmower. And then, underneath it all, he heard what Ranger heard. Or rather, he heard the absence that Ranger was focusing on. A pocket of silence in the wrong place. And within that silence, the faintest, most fragile thread of sound. It wasn't animal. It was too rhythmic, too human. A chill that had nothing to do with the shade washed over him. Ranger's breathing had changed. It was slow, deep, intentional. He was tracking. Before John could process the command, before logic could reassert itself, Ranger took a decisive step. Not back toward the familiar path. Not toward home. He stepped off the gravel walkway entirely, onto the silent, leaf-strewn earth, and turned his head, pulling the harness handle firmly to the left. The pull wasn't aggressive, but it was insistent, unmistakable. It was a direction. It was an answer to a question John hadn't even fully asked. In that moment, standing at the edge of the known world, John faced the ultimate test of his faith. Every rational cell told him to plant his feet, to command a heel, to retreat to the safety of his routine. But the sound, that faint, desperate sound, and the absolute certainty in Ranger's posture held him fast. He took a deep breath, the scent of damp earth and impending rain filling his lungs. "Okay," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Show me." And with that, he surrendered his will to the dog. He stepped off the path, and the world of solid routine dissolved into one of unknown shadows, and a single guiding purpose. The familiar symphony of the park faded behind them, swallowed by the dense trees. With each step, the world grew quieter, darker, and the fragile, crying sound grew just a little bit clearer. The last whisper of children's laughter was cut off as the trees closed around them like a curtain. The world beneath John's feet changed from a firm, predictable gravel to a treacherous carpet of decaying leaves and hidden roots. Each step was a surrender, a silent prayer offered to partnership he held in his hand. Ranger moved with a purpose that defied all training, pulling John deeper into a silence so profound it seemed to swallow sound itself. The familiar auditory map of Maple Grove Park was gone. The laughter, the distant traffic, the reassuring thwomp of the basketball, all faded into a muffled murmur, then into nothing. Here, the wind didn't rustle leaves. It sighed to the high branches. The only constant was the crunch snap of their progress and the controlled, steady pull of the harness. "Ranger, heel," John commanded, his voice slicing the quiet. The dog didn't pause. He simply adjusted his pull, becoming a guidepost. John's grip turned vice-tight on the handle. Every survival instinct screamed, "Turn back." His logical mind screamed to turn back. His grip tightened, knuckles white. He opened his mouth to command heel again, and a hidden root caught his toe. He pitched forward. The harness handle jerked as Ranger instantly braced, taking his weight. The dog let out a soft, concerned whuffle, nuzzling his knee. The act was so inherently protective. It broke the war inside him. "Okay," he breathed, the fight draining out. "I'm with you." He stopped trying to steer, stopped trying to guess the path. He became a follower, his entire world narrowing to the signals in his left hand. The direction of the pull, the tension in the frame, the slight shifts of Ranger's shoulders. As they moved, John's shoulder brushed a tree trunk. His fingers came away sticky with sap, or something else he didn't want to name. The woods grew thicker. The scent of pine and wet rot intensified. John's face was scraped by a low-hanging branch Ranger hadn't signaled for, a rare oversight that spoke of the dog's singular fixation. The temperature dropped further. The ground sloped downward. A ravine? A cliff edge? His hearing strained, searching for the telltale rush of water or the endless drop of air. His hearing, hyperacute from years of blindness, strained against the silence. He heard the scuttle of some small creature in the underbrush, the drip of moisture from a leaf, the frantic beat of his own heart, and then a punctuation in the quiet. Not a sound, but a break in the pattern of natural noise. Ranger halted. Not a full stop, but a coiled, quivering pause. His entire body was a pointing arrow. John froze, holding his breath. The dog let out the softest, most urgent whine John had ever heard. A sound of profound distress that sent a new kind of chill down John's spine. This wasn't about finding a lost ball. This was something else. And then he heard it. Not clearly, not yet, but a thread of sound woven into the sigh of the wind. A rhythmic, hiccuping little noise. Faint, muffled, unbelievably fragile. His brain scrambled to categorize it. A wounded bird? A cat? But the rhythm was wrong. It was too even, too pathetic. It hit him with the force of a physical blow. It was a crying sound, a human sound, a baby's sound. "No," John whispered, disbelief turning the word to ash in his mouth. It was impossible. They were in the middle of a wooded thicket, away from all paths. A baby couldn't be here. His mind rejected it. But Ranger was already moving again, pulling with renewed, gentle insistence, his path now laser-focused on that faint, heartbreaking noise. The last of John's resistance shattered. The internal conflict was over, burned away by a cold, clarifying dread. Logic no longer mattered. Only the sound did. Only Ranger certainly did. The mission had changed. This was no longer a walk. It was a search. He let Ranger guide him, step by careful step, around a thicket, over a fallen log. The crying grew slightly louder, no longer just a thread, but a discernible pattern of misery. Weak wails punctuated by exhausted, shuddering breaths. The air grew colder, damper. They had to be in some sort of hollow or depression. Ranger slowed to a crawl, his body low. He was no longer just leading. He was approaching. John's senses were on a razor's edge. The smell of damp earth was now mixed with something else. The faint, clean scent of baby powder, and underneath it, the sour note of distress. The dog stopped completely. He turned his head, pressing his wet nose against John's leg, then nudged him forward half a step. A final, unmistakable signal. Here. It's here. John's breath froze in his lungs. The crying was now directly in front of him, weak and pitiful. He released the harness handle, his hands trembling violently as he reached out into the void. He knelt, the damp earth soaking through his pants. His fingers brushed cold, wet leaves, then rough, damp cardboard, the corner of a box. A fresh, piercing wail erupted, inches from his searching hands. Every thought, every fear, every shred of doubt exploded into a single, white-hot point of action. His world, once defined by darkness and trust, now held only one thing: the desperate, living weight of a child waiting in the cold. Reality narrowed to a single, shocking point of contact: the rough edge of a cardboard box and the living, trembling warmth within. John's hands, which had navigated the world through texture and pressure, now froze in disbelief. The crying, now a raw, ragged sound directly in front of him, filled the cold air and left no room for doubt. His mind, trained for logistical problems and tangible threats, short-circuited. A baby. Here. In a box. In the woods. The concepts refused to align. This was the stuff of news headlines, of horrific stories whispered in disbelief. Now the quiet Thursday walk in Maple Grove Park. The smell of damp cardboard and sour milk hit him. His stomach clenched. He swallowed back a throatful of acid. This was an accident. This was an abandonment. The word echoed in his skull, dark and final. The shock lasted only a second before it was incinerated by a surge of primal urgency. The cries were weakening, hiccuping into shallow, shuddering gasps. The cold was a palpable enemy. John's military training, long dormant, slammed back into the forefront of his mind. Assess, secure, act. I'm here, he heard himself say, his voice a rough, unfamiliar sound of forced calm. You're not alone. I'm here. He wasn't sure if the words were for the infant or for himself. He had to see. Without sight, his hands became his eyes. He released the edge of the box and reached in, his movement slow, terrified of causing harm. His fingertips brushed against synthetic fabric, a cheap, thin sleeper, damp with cold. Then the shocking, delicate softness of a tiny cheek, ice-cold and wet with tears. A miniature hand flailed, batting weakly against his knuckles. The contact sent a jolt through him, a surge of protective ferocity so powerful it stole his breath. The frantic search was over, but a more delicate one began. Keeping one hand gently cupped over the shivering little form, he used the other to map the confines of the makeshift cradle. It was a simple cardboard box, like one for printer paper, now soggy at the bottom. His fingers traced the interior, finding a single thin blanket, inadequate and damp. No note, no bottle, nothing but the child and the crushing cruelty of the act. Ranger, who had been a statue of silent vigilance, now pressed his entire weight against John's side, a living, warm barrier against the world. The dog's nose gently sniffed the air above the box, and he let out a low, vibrating whine of shared concern. He then carefully licked John's wrist, as if to say, I know. I'm here. Good boy. John choked out, the gratitude a lump in his throat. Ranger hadn't just found a sound. He had identified a life in need. His intuition had pierced through the absurdity of the situation, guiding them to this exact, terrible spot. Gently, with a tenderness he didn't know he possessed, John slid his hands under the tiny body. The infant was lighter than he'd imagined, a fragile bundle of trembling cold. He lifted the child from the confines of the box. Cradling at her, he instinctively felt against his chest. The damp sleeper soaked into his shirt, a chilling shock. He fumbled with the inadequate blanket, trying to wrap it around her, to use his own body heat as a shield. She stiffened at the movement, then let out a fresh, sharp cry of protest that quickly dissolved into weak, exhausted mewling. The sound was a knife to John's heart. He rocked instinctively, a slow, side-to-side sway. Sure, little one. It's okay. You're safe now. I've got you. He repeated the phrases like a mantra, his voice a low, steady rumble against her ear. In the chaos, the realization of Ranger's role settled upon him with humbling force. This was no trained response. No guide dog was taught to track the sound of a human infant off-path. This was something deeper, an innate sensitivity, a bond that allowed Ranger to sense distress beyond the scope of his duties. He hadn't just been John's eyes. He had been the conscience of the woods, the only one who heard the silent scream of abandonment, all cut through the panic. This animal, his partner, was a true hero, but always a luxury he couldn't afford. The baby in his arms was growing quieter, too quiet. The shivers were constant. The cold was winning. The phone was in his pocket. To call for help, he'd have to put her down. But what if she stopped breathing in those 5 seconds? The immediate, terrifying truth was this. His phone was in his jacket pocket. To call for help, he would have to put the baby down. Even for a moment, the thought was unbearable. Ranger, he said, his voice taut with command. Steady. Guard. He shifted slowly, lowering himself to sit on the damp ground, his back against a tree trunk. He rearranged the tiny weight in the crook of his left arm, securing her tightly against the warmth of his body. With his right hand, he moved with agonizing slowness, unzipping his jacket, trying to envelop her further. His fingers, numb with cold and adrenaline, finally found his phone in his pocket. He pulled it out, his thumb finding the emergency call shortcut he'd programmed for exactly this kind of crisis. Though he'd never imagined this. He held the phone to his ear, listening for the dial tone. The baby gave a feeble cough. Ranger whined softly, nudging the hand that held the phone, as if urging him to hurry. The 911 operator's voice was a lifeline, calm and professional. 911, what is your emergency? John took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing his voice into coherence. I need an ambulance. In Maple Grove Park, in the woods east of the main path, I've found an abandoned infant. She's alive, but she's very cold. I'm blind. My guide dog found her. You need to hurry. As he answered the operator's rapid-fire questions, his location, the baby's condition, his own name, he kept rocking. He described the box, the lack of supplies. With each word, the surreal horror of it became more real, more solid. While he spoke, the baby's cries faded completely, subsiding into an alarming, shallow quiet. Her breathing was a faint, rapid flutter against his neck. The operator was telling him help was on the way, to stay on the line. But John's world had shrunk to the terrifyingly faint rhythm of a tiny heartbeat against his own, waiting in the silent, cold dark for a rescue that felt an eternity away. The waiting was a new kind of darkness. John sat trapped against a tree, the silent child of cold, fragile weight against his chest, each second stretching into an agony of helplessness. Then, cutting through the dense silence of the woods, came the sound he'd been clinging to, the distant, wailing approach of sirens. They were a promise, a lifeline tearing through the twilight. Ranger surged to his feet with a sharp bark, his tail thumping against John's leg. They're coming, partner, John whispered, his voice raw. They're coming. He tightened his hold on the baby, his own body trembling from adrenaline and cold. The sirens ripped through the twilight, a wailing promise. Then beams of light, harsh, white swords, slashed through the trees, painting the trunks in stark, moving stripes. Shadows leaped and danced. Shouts followed, voices calling his name. John, Mr. Henderson, can you hear us? Here. John bellowed, the force of it startling the infant in his arms, who let out a weak, reedy cry. The sound, though feeble, was the sweetest relief he'd ever felt. We're in the trees, east of the main path. Follow the sound. Chaos, beautiful and controlled, descended upon the quiet grove. The crunch of heavy boots on undergrowth, the crackle of police radios, beams of powerful flashlights cutting through the gathering dusk like laser swords, painting the trunks in stark, moving stripes of white. Ranger stood firm, positioned between John and the approaching strangers, not aggressive but alert, a loyal sentinel. Easy, Ranger, friends, John said, and the dog gave a low woof of understanding, his posture easing slightly. The first to reach them was a paramedic, a woman whose voice was calm and immediate. Mr. Henderson? I'm Sarah. I need to see the baby. John tilted his arms upward, an offering. He felt her gentle, professional hands assessing the tiny form, taking the weight from him. The sudden absence of that warmth left him feeling hollow, terrified. Is she? She's breathing, Sarah said quickly, her focus absolute. She's hypothermic. We need to get her warmed up now. John heard the rustle of a foil emergency blanket, the zip of a medical kit. A small oxygen mask hissed to life. The baby, now being handled by experts, let out a stronger, indignant cry. That's a good sound. Another voice, male, said, a police officer. Means she's fighting. He placed a firm, reassuring hand on John's shoulder. You did good. Real good. Can you tell me what happened? As John gave his halting, sensory account, the walk, Ranger's detour, the cry, the box, the scene around him unfolded in a symphony of efficient action. The paramedic worked swiftly, wrapping the now wailing infant in heated blankets. The stark white light illuminated the scene. The soggy cardboard box, a damning piece of evidence. Ranger, pressed close to John, the leaves and mud on John's knees. The moment of transfer was both a relief and a wrench. We're taking her to Mercy General, Sarah said. You did exactly the right thing. keeping her warm. John heard the gurney being maneuvered over the rough ground. He wanted to reach out to touch the baby one more time, to ensure she was real. Instead, he found Ranger's head and buried his fingers in the dog's fur. "Go," he said to the paramedics. "To the baby. Just go." As the gurney moved away, followed by the beam of flashlights, a strange silence fell again, now broken by the officer's continued questions and the static of the radio. A sound escaped him, half sob, half gasp, as the tremors he'd been holding back finally won. He bent forward, the cold air burning in his lungs, his face falling into his hands. Ranger whined, licking his ear and nudging his hands away from his face. The officer gave him a moment, his voice softening. "It's a lot to process. You and your dog, you saved a life today." The world soon intruded. As John was helped to his feet and guided back toward the park, the scope of the event became clear. The woods were now a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape. The familiar park was transformed, bathed in the rotating red and blue lights of police cruisers and an ambulance. A small crowd had gathered at the edge of the tape, their murmurs a buzzing hive of shock and curiosity. News vans, drawn by the scanner traffic, were already rolling in. Cameras were set up, their lights harsh and invasive. A reporter tried to call out to John as an officer led him to a squad car to give his formal statement. "Sir, can you tell us what happened? How did your dog know?" John ignored them, his focus inward on the fading sensation of a tiny weight against his heart. At the station, the story was repeated, details solidified. The infant, he learned, was a newborn girl, likely less than 48 hours old. The search for the mother had already begun. It was close to midnight when an officer drove him home. The quiet of his house was alien, the routine shattered. He fed Ranger, his hand still unsteady. The dog ate, then immediately returned to him, resting his chin on John's knee with a deep sigh, as emotionally spent as his owner. The phone began to ring. First the police with updates, then a call from a hospital. The nursing supervisor informed him, with a voice thick with emotion, that baby Jane Doe was stable. The warming procedures had worked. She would be okay. "They're calling her the miracle baby," the nurse said, "and they're calling your dog a hero on the news." John thanked her and hung up. He sat in his dark living room, the only light from the street lamp outside. Ranger, sensing his mood, hopped onto the sofa and laid his full weight against him. The television, silent, was a black void. But in his mind, John saw it all. The lights, the gurney, the crowd, the cameras. The private, profound moment in the woods had exploded into a public spectacle. His and Ranger's quiet world of trust had collided with desperate, tragic act. And in the aftermath, nothing would ever be quite the same. He had gone out for a walk and had come home a hero. But as the adrenaline faded, a deeper question settled in its place, cold and persistent. In a world where a newborn could be left in a box in the woods, what did the word hero even mean? 2 weeks later, John stood at the edge of Maple Grove Park, the harness handle firm in his grip. The memory of flashing lights and cold dread had faded, replaced by a quieter, more persistent echo. Today, they weren't just returning for a walk. They were returning to the place where their story had fractured and remade itself. The park had returned to normal. The basketball thumped, children laughed, and the breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. But for John, the geography had forever changed. He knew exactly where the trees thickened, where the known path ended, and the realm of instinct began. Ranger, sensing his hesitation, gave a soft, encouraging pull. "It's okay," the pull said. "We're together." The ceremony at the city council chamber had been the day before. A small, formal affair with polished wood and the smell of coffee. Ranger, wearing his formal harness, had sat impeccably still as the mayor spoke about extraordinary service beyond duty and pinned a small, shiny medal to his collar. John had accepted the citation, his voice steady as he thanked him, insisting, "Ranger did the work. I just had the sense to follow." But the truest recognition had come in the quiet moments afterward. An elderly woman had approached, her hand finding John's arm. "My grandson was a preemie," she'd whispered, her voice cracking. "He was in an incubator for weeks. When I heard about your dog, it made me believe in guardians. Thank you. That, more than any medal, had anchored the experience in something real. Now, back at the park, John reflected on the profound truth Ranger had revealed. He was not just a guide dog. He was a bridge. He bridged the gap between John and the visual world. Yes, but in those woods, he had bridged a more profound chasm, the one between a helpless child and hope. His capability wasn't merely trained. It was innate, a sensitivity to distress so fine-tuned it could pluck a single cry from the white noise of the world. He hadn't just followed a sound. He had answered a silent plea for mercy. The service animal community hailed it as a landmark case of canine intuition. For John, it was simpler. It was a day he learned his best friend had a soul deeper than the ocean. An update had come from the social worker. Baby Emma, as the nurses had named her, was thriving, gaining weight in the neonatal unit, showered with donated blankets and toys from a community gripped by her story. The search for her mother continued, a complex tangle of sorrow and investigation. But Emma's future was now secure. A local family, vetted and yearning, was already preparing to welcome her. Her story, which began in a cold box, was now woven with threads of compassion. Her life a testament to the fact that an act of abandonment could be met by a cascade of care. John thought of her often. That specific, feather-light weight in his arms. He would never know her face, but he knew her presence in the world. She was a living proof that their detour had mattered. Ranger had not just saved a life. He had launched Emma's life. A life that would now be filled with first steps, first words, and birthdays, a future reclaimed from the shadows. As they walked their familiar route, John realized the calm before the storm was gone forever, and in its place was something stronger, a profound peace. The trust between man and dog was no longer just a functional contract. It was a sacred covenant, tested in fire and proven unbreakable. He no longer just relied on Ranger. He revered him. He stopped at their usual turnaround point, the gnarled oak. Ranger paused, waiting. But this time, John didn't signal for home. He knelt, a rare public display of affection, and wrapped his arms around the dog. He felt the cool metal of the metal against Ranger's warm neck, the steady beat of his heart, the soft fur that held the scent of earth and loyalty. "You're a good boy," he murmured, his voice thick. "The best." Ranger turned and lavished his face with a single, sloppy, perfect kiss, his tail swishing to the fallen leaves. They continued their walk, the afternoon light golden and warm. The message of their story was clear to John now, as solid as a path beneath his feet. Heroism wasn't about grand gestures or superhuman strength. It was found in the quiet partnership between a veteran and his dog. It was born in the courage to follow when the path disappears, to trust a bond over logic and act with compassion when confronted with the unthinkable. It was a story about the invisible lines that connect us, the line of trust between a man and his guide, the line of instinct that can pierce through indifference, and the fragile, unbreakable line of a single cry that can summon a miracle. In a world that often feels fractured, their story was a reminder that we are all capable of being guides for one another, of hearing the cries others miss, and of leading with kindness into the unknown. John reached the edge of the park, the sounds of the street welcoming them back. Ranger guided him to the curb and stopped, solid as a rock, waiting for the traffic to clear. John smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his sightless eyes. "Forward," he said, and together they stepped into the flow of life, a man, his dog, and the enduring legacy of a hope found in the dark. The late sun cast their long, intertwined shadow ahead of them on the pavement, a single, unbroken shape that flowed over cracks and obstacles, moving as one being toward home, carrying a quiet miracle in their wake. If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bonds Unspoken. Every click helps us share more incredible moments that celebrate the bond between humans and animals. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds us what true loyalty feels like.